I was born in a biologically female body, but I am not biologically female. I don't feel like a she describes me.
Is there another word that you feel describes you better?
I use several pronouns. I use the pronouns Z, star, and he.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to another episode of Common Ground Conversations. Long time no see. In this one, we're going to be unpacking the question, what is gender? What is sex? What is a man? What is a woman? What is a boy? What is a girl? What is the difference? And why is it important? What are the implications? We're going to be using this conversation with Theo, this person in front of you. And you can see Theo's dad off to the left here. We're going to be unpacking some of these ideas with Theo. And I'm going to jump back and forth between the conversation itself and also the whiteboard where I'll essentially unpack with some drawings here. Now, Theo is very forthright with having autism, and despite being a biological female, not identifying or self-identifying as female, not identifying with she, her pronouns, and using very different pronouns, as you'll see. So without further ado, let's jump into it and take a listen. Oh, you're guiding? Yeah, awesome. Would you like to join in as well?
No. This is the most articulate one you'll find.
Okay, fantastic. Hello, what's your name?
I'm Theo.
Theo? Richard. Nice to meet you, Theo. So to start off, Theo, I wanted to ask the first question being, what is gender and how is it different to sex in your eyes?
Gender is a social construct, and this is what...
Just so you know, he's a known transphobe.
I'm a what?
Known transphobe.
I'm a what? I am a known transphobe, in case you missed that. That's what he was saying. I didn't hear what he said.
I think it was making a dry comment that didn't work.
Right.
He was trying to be humorous, but the timing didn't work.
I got it. I got it.
Anyway.
So, yeah. I'm going to quickly give everyone a little bit of context. He's actually one of the event organizers or coordinators. We went to this event 1 year ago and actually got removed by Victoria Police for ostensibly, they claimed, being likely to breach the peace and making people feel unsafe. That was sufficient grounds in their eyes for giving us a move on order and getting us out of a public space in Victoria. We've had an ongoing 12-month investigation with Vic Police. We're going to be doing a full episode on it shortly. But he was one of the people, you'll see his face in that episode. He was one of the people who was coordinating with Vic Police to get us removed. Let's get back over to Theo. What would you say? What is gender?
Gender is a social construct, and it is what you feel inside. It is different from sex because sex is your external and internal genitalia, and they are what you were born with. Your gender can differ from your sex.
Okay, I think I understand. I'm with you so far.
Calling someone by their sex instead of their gender makes it sound like a cop, and it makes it sound like a TERF. A TERF is a trans-exclusionary radical feminist. Please just refer to someone by their gender.
Right. Okay. So I think let me relay it back to you just to make sure that we're on the same page, and then we can go from there. So genders, in your eyes, it's more of a social construct. It doesn't have to be related to someone's biological sex, and it's determined. Is it both a social construct and how someone feels?
Yes.
Okay. Okay, now I was tossing up how deep to go into this idea with Theo, given that, we're in a public space and there's limited time. They're going to be off doing things, but I do want to unpack it now with you. So whenever it comes to the term gender, it's a very ambiguous term. Different people use it to mean different things in different situations. It's not very helpful when you're trying to find common ground. It's not very helpful when you're trying to make sense of things. So here's how I would recommend breaking it down. Everyone can find common ground that we have a biological sex. When I say everyone, I'd better be careful. There's going to be someone out there who denies that. But we've got male, we've got female, and we've got, I'm going to write intersex here for that small portion of the population, but large majority, we've got either biological male or biological female. You can usually find common ground with people on that. Beyond that, that's where people start to talk about gender. And as you heard Theo mention, it being a social construct. I might also mention here, right, this entire episode is contained, or like a container for this episode, is gratitude for Theo. This is in no way designed to somehow undermine or demean Theo or anything like that. I really appreciate Theo having a conversation with me, and I think everyone watching this if you're here watching with the right spirit, you're also going to be very appreciative of Theo having had this conversation. And we're coming from a place of seeking to understand, and then that understanding being the basis with which we ascertain, hey, what is true, and also what is good, what is moral, where should we be aiming at, and how do we get there together via finding common ground. So we have gender. We have, it's almost like we actually don't have gender. We don't want to use this term. It's too confusing. So we break it down into biological sex. And then when it comes to gender and this social construct messaging, sometimes people can use social construct to simply mean it doesn't, or it's not defined objectively. So it's a subjective term. Some people can then run with that to say that it's arbitrary or insignificant. I'll just write insig, right? Now, don't be afraid when someone says that it's just a social construct. If they say it as it's just a social construct, you can dive a little bit deeper. And this is where I think it's useful to recognize that we as human beings, we have an underlying biology, and that underlying biology gives rise to certain characteristics for biological males and biological females. And those characteristics come with certain social expectations. So we have an underlying biology, and then we have kind of a social layer slash cultural layer. So let me give you an example of something like this. So for example, we have the underlying biology of males, right? Males have high testosterone on average, and it's to do with the underlying chromosomal differences between biological males and biological females. And we'll do this, we'll write females over here. So as an example, on the social or cultural level, we have an expectation that biological males are going to be physically stronger, and that they ought to cultivate that physical strength, and that they ought to be provider protectors. Now we're delving into some touchy territory, we might say, but the main purpose or the main takeaway here is that just because we have something that is a social construct or a notion that is agreed upon socially does not mean that that is not anchored in or stemming from an underlying biology. Okay, so it doesn't, just because it's a social construct, I think you can actually find common ground with people that it's a social construct, but it doesn't mean that it's arbitrary. It doesn't mean that it's insignificant. It doesn't mean that it doesn't have an underlying objective reality from which it stems. Now, are there some differences with respect to the conceptions of what a biological male, if we come back to here, of what a biological male is supposed to do or supposed to be, and what a biological female is supposed to do and supposed to be? Yes, this changes between cultures, it changes between generations, but are there some things that don't change? Also, yes. And so we can dive into that a little bit deeper another time. So when it comes to gender, we've already got sex. Then when it comes to gender, I'd recommend breaking this down into, you'll hear some of these terms. I'll run them down here actually. You'll hear some of these terms like gender identity, which is used to refer to how people self-identify. So how do you personally feel or identify? Do you feel like a man? Do you feel like a woman? Do you feel like non-binary, something else? Do you feel like, in Theo's case, using the pronoun star? Now, you may or may not agree with it. We're going to dive into where this comes from in a little bit. But so we have gender identity, which is self-determined. How do you feel? You might hear the word authentically included in that definition by some people. And then also gender expression, I find is a useful term to find common ground on. Gender expression being how do you express your gender identity? So if you say you feel like a woman, or I self-identify as a woman, how do you express that? Do you wear a dress, essentially? Now you might be thinking, well, doesn't that rely upon gender stereotypes or sex-based stereotypes? And I would say yes. So this is another key term that I would get familiar with or bring into a conversation like this if you're genuinely trying to find common ground. Now, I don't do this with Theo because we're limited on time, but gender stereotypes, and I'm going to write in brackets here, sex-based stereotypes. Wherever I can, I'm going to avoid using the term gender, and I'm going to try and be more specific. So, whenever you're having conversations about what is gender, what is a man, what is a woman, what is a boy, what is a girl, all this, it's worth going, okay, can we find common ground on biological sex? We have biological males, we have biological females, we have a very small portion of the population that classifies or is intersex, right? Can we find common ground on that? Okay, if we can we also agree that there are significant, or there are some notable, perhaps, biological differences between males and females? Say, for example, females can give birth. Okay, that's notable, right? Females can give birth. They produce much higher estrogen levels. Well, maybe not all that much higher than the modern man and the modern male, but anyway, so females are capable of giving birth. They have a uterus, they have ovaries, etc., whereas males do not. They have different anatomy, physiology, neurology, endocrinology, different hormones, notably testosterone, and all of the downstream physical manifestations of that. Now, those bleed into the social or the cultural or the socio-cultural level, which is where you'll then hear the term social construct, okay? So we've got biological sex. You should try and find common ground on that. Then when it comes to gender, you can find, okay, well, can we find common ground? There are some sex-based stereotypes. There are certain expectations or traits or qualities that we tend to associate with biological males, and certain traits that we tend to associate, maybe I'll do like a dress like this. Can you tell art wasn't my forte in school? And we have certain traits, characteristics, etc., that we associate with females. So you might say, okay, boys, physically strong. Physical strong. And there's going to be someone out there who's like, oh, okay, well, not all men are physically strong, or women can be strong as well. Yes, I know, obviously. But generally speaking, we associate physical strength with being a male characteristic, or a more male typical characteristic. And that's not arbitrary. That's not just a social construct that is made up out of thin air. It relates to our underlying biology, namely the XY chromosomes and the expression or the creation of testosterone downstream, and then etc., everything that comes from that. We might do the same thing with women, right? Sex-based stereotypes, we might say caretaker, right? Really compassionate and caring. We might, just the classics, blue and pink, okay? I'm not going to go into all of them, but these are the sex-based stereotypes. Can we find common ground that there are certain traits, qualities, expectations that we tend to have of biological males and biological females? You might also, to kind of ease the load in and make it easier to find common ground, you might also like to say, okay, well, can we find common ground that the current sex-based stereotypes, they're not necessarily correct or right, okay? So we can agree that they change over time, these sex-based stereotypes, or some aspects of the sex-based stereotypes change over time. But we could also ask the question, do some things not change? And if so, what exactly are they? So for example, it hasn't really changed that males are expected to be the the provider protector, right? And that the female or the woman is expected to be a caretaker for the children. Now, why has that not changed over time? Or why has that been, now these might loosen over the time, but why is that generally more consistent than perhaps other aspects of these sex-based stereotypes? And I would say you can make a strong argument that it's because it's more anchored in the underlying biology that gives rise to those sex-based stereotypes. Okay, so hopefully you then can find common ground on there is sex, there are sex-based stereotypes. Now beyond that, people are also going to say, do I feel like I align with a particular sex-based stereotype, right? Do I align with that group of qualities or stereotypes that are associated with males, yes or no? And do I identify more so with that group of qualities that tend to be more female typical? Now, this is where I see gender identity coming in. So gender identity being how you self-identify. I see that, and I don't see a way around this unless someone can point it out, but this is based on your personal notion of these sex-based stereotypes. So if I say I feel like a woman, how do I know what feeling like a woman feels like? I have a preconceived idea of what a woman is like, and then I might feel like I fit more so into that category than I do necessarily a man or a he, him, or whatever I associate with that terminology. And then gender expression being how you express that gender identity. Okay, so I hope that that gives us a couple of terms with which to begin making sense of this whole gender, man, woman, boy, girl sphere. Let's jump back into the conversation with Theo.
So if we had, I've got 2 younger sisters and I'm personally a biological male. If we just took as an example, we had like a young biological male with us here, young kid, and they're trying to understand gender and sex and all this. And they like playing with dolls.
Yeah.
They like wearing pink.
That does not necessarily mean they are a girl. Ask them what they feel inside.
Common ground.
And that would be their gender.
Well, I suppose common ground insofar as just because a biological male plays with dolls and likes pink does not make them a girl. And just because a biological female likes playing with trucks does not make that biological female a boy. Now, you might also notice, let me jump across here. I'm deliberately saying biological male and biological female because these terms are more and more being used in the context of people saying assigned male at birth, right? Which presupposes that it's something you're assigned instead of, which presupposes this is something that may be incorrect or maybe just an incorrect social construct or something of the sort, as opposed to identifying a biological reality. And this is where you might see terms like AMAB to mean assigned male at birth or AFAB for assigned female at birth. So I suppose I have a concern here with respect to biological denialism. And part of me wonders whether we have become so prosperous that it's almost like we're looking for the final boss. We're looking for the final obstacle, the final source of oppression for us to overcome. And it's almost as though the last, one of the last ones, one way of thinking about it is if you want a final boss, maybe you can find it in biology. Maybe biology is the final boss. Maybe biology is the source of oppression that we're attempting to overcome and nullify by way of biological denialism. Let's jump back into the conversation.
Ask them what they feel inside. If they say they don't feel like a boy, then they're not a boy. And they don't have to know the answers right away. Let them experiment. Maybe give them age-appropriate books like My Shadow is Purple.
Right? And so if we had a 5-year-old who, just as an example, a 5-year-old biological male who liked pink, liked dolls, but was also saying, I am a girl, and was quite consistent, is that where...
Then say, okay, you are a girl.
And look, this is where Theo and I would disagree, but I was just allowing Theo to kind of lay out Theo's reasoning. I will mention, though, what we can find common ground on here is we both have a shared value, right? We might disagree up here, we might disagree up here, and what I'm trying to do is go deeper and see, okay, can we find some deeper reasoning down here that we actually agree upon, or a value that we agree upon? And what we do agree upon is the value for individual liberty. We both agree that where possible, people should be allowed to live their life as they see fit, regardless of their biological sex. So just because I am a biological male doesn't mean that I have to live my life to a preordained script, just as Theo, as a biological female, doesn't have to live her life based on a preordained script solely based on her biological sex. And so that's where I can find common ground with Theo. Where I don't find common ground with Theo here is the follow-on from that, right? I don't believe is, yes, you are what you say you are. If there's a young boy saying, I feel like a girl or I am a girl, I don't think it's appropriate to affirm and say, yes, you are what you say you are. I think it's appropriate to actually test assumptions from a place of love and compassion. Where is this coming from? What makes you think that you're a girl? Is there some kind of, coming back to those sex-based stereotypes and gender identity, right? If the gender identity is this young boy saying, I am a girl, how is that not based on some kind of sex-based stereotype? What does this young boy associate with she, her, with girl? And let's say that, the young boy, I've heard stories like this. Let's say that the young boy actually notices that his younger sister, who's a newborn, is getting more attention and love from the parents. And so young child logic is, oh, maybe if I was a girl, I would get more love and attention from my parents. And so I'm a girl, right? Versus, someone's going to clip that, versus, also testing the assumption of, could it be that this boy believes that girls like pink and girls like dolls, and this boy actually has an affinity for pink things and for dolls, and testing that assumption. Maybe this boy is actually just a feminine boy, and maybe that's okay, right? And maybe that's what the boy needs to hear, as opposed to hearing the reason why you're experiencing this psychological stress, right? The gender dysphoria, the reason why you're experiencing this gender dysphoria and this kind of discomfort with respect to your sexed body, it might not actually have anything to do with your body being in the wrong, right? There might be nothing wrong with your body. It might be a psychological issue where this boy has a rigid conception as to what a girl is. It goes, okay, this is what a girl is and does, and that's what I like to do, or that's the way that I like to be, and therefore identifies as she, her, or a girl. And the problem here, you might be thinking, why does this even matter? The reason why this matters, this is the tragic part, I've met young girls, biological females, who have been swept up or caught up or confused by all of this, and in experiencing gender dysphoria. They're a biological female, okay? Biological female, and they don't feel comfortable in their own body. Why is the right question. If that person doesn't feel comfortable and says, I don't feel like a she, her, we need to ask why. Could it be that there is some kind of discomfort stemming from budding breasts, stemming from the increased sexual attention that this young girl is experiencing as she becomes an adult? Is there might there be some kind of sexual trauma associated with her breasts? I've read testimonials like this, and that lead to gender or body, I'm not sure if body dysmorphia is the right term, but definitely gender dysphoria, right? Where these biological females who've been sexually assaulted in childhood are getting swept up in all this and believing that the solution is surgery, and that they actually are in fact non-binary or they're he, hims, and that they need surgery to fix their gender dysphoria instead of going back into something like psychotherapy to fix the sexual trauma. So all that to say, this is really important to get clear on. And we might not necessarily think it when we think, oh, just let people choose their pronouns, right? Just let people do what they want. That's where we can find this shared value for individual liberty, insofar as people should be able to do what they want, but there are important limitations, and also we have to make sure that young people in particular don't get swept up in the confusion, and that we don't affirm, and in doing so cultivate, if we just affirm to no end, it's like, at what point does that become narcissism? I don't know how to spell narcissism. And at what point are we actually just operating off a sophisticated compassion or an unsophisticated compassion, where we want to say yes because it makes us feel good, not necessarily because it's the best thing for the young person in front of us? Think about as a parent, right? There are going to be certain instances where you have to be discerning, and you actually have to say to your child, you are not just what you say you are, and people don't have to treat you exactly how you demand to be treated. It's like we're breeding mini tyrants. And this is, FYI, this is nothing against Theo. Again, I really appreciate Theo engaging in this conversation. And when I have a conversation with someone like Theo, you can see like this isn't coming from a place of animosity or anything like that. But it is coming from a place of, hopefully you can tell, of compassion and of love. I do want to make sure that we are clear on what all of the implications of these language choices are, because language is the building block of thought, okay? It's not, language isn't just what we use to communicate. It's language is the building block of thought. So if we are confused about our language, it's going to kerfuffle our thoughts, and that's going to bleed down into our actions, which is why, to me, it's tragic that we have some, in particular, young girls with autism or signs of autism being overrepresented amongst the trans community. Same goes for people who have been victims of sexual assault. They are overrepresented amongst the trans community, and we have to ask why. We have to ask why, and we have to support these people, not from a place of blind or unsophisticated compassion, but from a place of, hey, what exactly is going on here? We need to have a conversation. We need to try our best to ascertain what is true and what is appropriate, what is good, what is the right way forward. We need to try and find common ground. So let's jump back into the video here.
Because personally, I would rather my child change their pronouns 1,000 times than have to write their obituary. I would rather them change their pronouns, change their gender, change their hair, as long as they feel comfortable and feel like they can't and end up taking their own life.
And I've heard some people say, you know, to parents who might be resisting, do you want a trans kid or do you want like a dead kid or something like that? So, which is kind of rehashing what you've said there.
Now, in the past, when someone has kind of presented this argument to me, I've very quickly thought, of course, I want a trans kid as opposed to a dead kid, but it's a false dichotomy. So what I mean by this, let me pull up the whiteboard, right? So the choice that's being laid out before us is trans kid or dead kid, right? And this is simply not what the options actually are. And this is where we have to be very careful. If we lay out the options like this, you can see how a kid that wants to, and I'm not saying that this is Theo, yeah, but I've met people like this in my filming sessions. There are people who will threaten you with, I am going to commit self-harm, or I'm going to commit suicide, or I'm going to hurt myself unless you do what I say. Now, how do you respond to a young person like that? How do you respond? Because if you drop everything, right? If you drop everything and say, I'm going to do whatever you say, at what point are you breeding a mini tyrant? At what point are you teaching tyranny or antisocial behavior? At what point, if you teach a kid, all you have to do is threaten self-harm and anyone and everyone around you will do whatever you say, that is a very bad incentive structure, okay? And so I think just on that, right, you have to think about these incentive structures. We have a culture that is, in my eyes, we have to be very careful. Again, I don't know how to spell some of this stuff, but we have to be very careful not to have a culture that incentivizes narcissism, that says you are exactly what you say you are. Anyone who doesn't go along with it or treat you how you want to be treated is some kind of bigot. We have to be very careful to not socialize young people into becoming tyrants, because it's the narcissist that becomes the tyrant in adulthood, that says all that matters is me and my experience, what I want. And if you don't go along with it, you're a bigot or you're a bad person. We also need to be careful not to incentivize victimhood. And this is where there's this really interesting kind of relationship here between being a tyrant and being a victim. We're teaching young people that in identifying as a victim, you actually gain more power. So take me, a white male who you know, gyms and whatnot, who I'm like the most privileged, so to speak, and it's almost like I have the least power because of my privilege. So because I'm most easily tarred and feathered as the bigot who doesn't understand, who is you know, in his little cloud of privilege or whatnot. It's like, you know nothing about me. You know absolutely nothing about me. You know nothing about my work ethic. You know nothing about the fruits of my labor. You know nothing about all of the trials and tribulations of my upbringing. And yet you assume because what? You see my Adam's apple, and who's to say that you're not misgendering me? Or you assume because you see the color of my skin. And since when is that not racist, right? You assuming that you know me based on the color of my skin, and therefore assuming the degree of my privilege. But alas, I digress. We have to be careful because we're incentivizing young people to think that we're essentially setting up a structure that says the more you identify as oppressed, the more you identify as a victim, the more power you actually get. So in this case, like, oh, you identify as trans, you choose your pronouns. If anyone doesn't use the pronouns that you choose, then they're somehow a bad person or a bigot or whatnot. Whereas I don't get to determine how you treat me. I don't get to just say, hey, this is what I expect you to do when you treat me. These are the expectations that you ought to have of me. This is the way you ought to see me. But if you identify as trans, then all of a sudden it's like you are exactly what you say you are, and if we don't affirm it, then bigot. So there's this very I'm almost tempted to use the term perverse or sick or pathological or ill structure that we're creating within our society, within the West more generally. One more thing before we jump back to the conversation with Theo, I want to touch on this victim and savior complex. Now, this is all only made possible because there is both a victim and a savior. None of this is possible without the savior, right? So it's easy to say, okay, we need less victims, but it's like, okay, well, we're incentivizing victimhood. And how are we incentivizing victimhood? We're incentivizing it because there are these people who are desperate to be saviors. They're desperate to be good people. I'm going to share a quick anecdote here, right? So I knew of someone whose mother was an ardent feminist. And I asked some probing questions with respect to, just because there was a board that didn't have 50-50 distribution, you know, I'm going to write this out as well. Just because there was a board that didn't have 50-50 distribution of male and female doesn't actually mean that the females have been discriminated against. And that was her logic. Her logic was, unless it's 50-50 on the board of this company, then misogyny, right? Or sexism. And I kind of pointed out that, well, men and women given freedom of choice will make different choices because men and women are different biologically, and that has, you know, that bleeds out into our sociology or bleeds out into our culture and individual choices. If we believe in individual autonomy and liberty, we have to be okay with disparate outcomes. So not 50-50. That is equity. If you want to enforce equal outcomes, then you cannot also be for liberty, freedom, and freedom of choice. Now, all of that to say, she was attached to being the savior. And what I was doing by asking my questions was I was potentially stripping her of her identity and her sacred source of meaning as the savior, the feminist who was here to get 50-50 representation and fight off the evil patriarchy, and to save the victims who were females who were underrepresented on this company board. And so the point that I'm making here is that, where does this come from? Where does this yearning or this desperation for identifying as a savior come from, to the point where we will affirm any claim of victimhood? Again, I don't want to project this onto Theo, but I'm using my conversation with Theo to unpack some of these big ideas with you. I'm just going to make 2 points here. One, could it potentially come from our prosperity? Right? we have so much at our fingertips that we've actually lost. It's almost like Maslow's hierarchy of needs, right? Where at the bottom you kind of have physiological needs, and then you have, you know, a need of security, and then there's a bit more of like a social belonging need and whatnot, and this security and safety. And it's like we've become so prosperous that we're moving up here to self-actualization, which is the top. This is Maslow's hierarchy of needs. You can go have a little research for yourself. But we are so prosperous, and we are also lacking a religious moral framework, right? Some kind of framework that tells us, here's what you should do with your life. Here is the good, here is the bad. Here is up, here is down. That's where heaven is, that's where hell is. The notion of genuine progress, an ideal for which to strive. Now, without religion, or without some kind of moral framework that orients us toward an ideal, and almost drowning in our prosperity like never before, we become desperate for meaning. Desperate for meaning. And man does not live off bread alone. We become desperate for meaning. And this is why when I am testing people's assumptions from a place of love, from a place of we need to ascertain what the objective truth is and then figure out together where we should be going, what I'm doing is, or what they are interpreting my questions as, is stripping them of this savior identity. I'm stripping them of this desperate source of meaning. But that's how it's being interpreted, instead of it being interpreted as, hey, we as a team, we can ascertain what is true and what is good, and then we can try and move in that direction together. So all this to say, there is this victim-savior complex or dynamic that wherein this rise in victimhood culture is only made possible by meaning-desperate saviors, eager and ready to affirm any claim of victimhood. Okay, let's jump back to our conversation with Theo.
Now, I'm curious, what if we asked this kid, why do you feel like you're a girl? And what if the kid said, oh, it's because I'm wearing pink and because I like dolls?
Well, then tell them, what does a girl, then ask them, what does a girl mean to you? And if they say, wearing pink and wearing dresses, say, wearing pink and dresses does not mean you are a girl. I
Common
like
ground.
wearing pink and wearing dresses. I am not a girl. I've never been a girl. I am not a boy. I am in between. Tell them, what do you feel inside if you were the last person on earth and no one was about and you did not have clothes, what gender would you be?
And this is where I think I could have gone deeper with Theo, but I don't actually have, we didn't end up doing it in the conversation, but I'm going to jump to the right whiteboard here, right? How do you feel? Do you feel? Are you a boy or are you a girl, etc.? All of these, you actually can't make a call about whether you feel like a boy or a girl without asking that young person, well, what is it that you associate with being a boy, or what is it that you associate with being a girl? Because you can be as you are in your biological body and have interests that may be more male typical or maybe more female typical. Okay, let's jump back to Theo.
Interesting. Okay, I think I understand your perspective there. And so, if you don't mind me asking, from your personal experience, what made you realize that you felt more like neither boy nor girl?
For me, I am transmasculine and boy flex. So I was born in a biologically female body, but I am not biologically female. So for me, I realized that I was other around year 5, when people started referring to me more as a girl. I realized I was non-binary. Yes, my gender has changed several times since then, but it still relates. I am autistic, and autistic people...
Okay, before we jump into the autism side of things, I want to just briefly comment on what Theo mentioned here. So to me, it's really tragic that Theo has been led to believe that she was a biological female, or was born a biological female, but is no longer actually a biological female. To me, I don't know how far you can take that without encouraging a sense of narcissism in a young person. And that's nothing against Theo. It's more so against, I suppose, a word of caution for us as a culture. I don't want to be telling young people that they are anything, right? Because Theo is a biological female, but Theo also needs to know that if you don't want to live up to, so to speak, the expectations or the culturally accepted expectations of what a biological female is supposed to do, that's okay, Theo. And to kind of learn to love herself as she is like that, I suppose. Now, with respect to non-binary, I want to briefly ask, right? So when someone identifies as non-binary, a lot of people are like, what even is that? And I think based on the conversations that I've had, I actually have some insights that may be helpful. Okay, so people have an idea of he, him, and some of the expectations that go along with it, and she, her, and some of the expectations go along with that. We might say she, her / girl, right? And he, him / boy. And if you're a biological male, and let's say you're over here, you're a biological male, and you don't like trucks, okay? And you don't like the color blue, and you actually don't want to cultivate physical strength, and you hate it when people expect that from you. You might choose, okay, well, maybe I don't have to do this. And if you think that he, him means all of these things, and you're told you can actually identify as whatever you want, then she, her, right? And maybe you want to be taken care of by a male, perhaps. Maybe you're actually a gay young boy, right? That's also a major concern, or an internal contradiction amongst the LGBT, where we've spoken to some gay people who have really said, we're not for this whole trans messaging, because young effeminate boys who may turn out to be gay are actually, some of them, it's a concern is that they're getting swept up in this, and that's essentially gay boys who may be rather effeminate or have feminine or more female typical qualities are being told the reason why you feel uncomfortable or psychologically not at ease is because you're actually a girl in boy's body, right? Boy's body. And then the solution, some of them are being led to believe, is surgery and estrogen. And is that not conversion therapy? A new age conversion therapy. And so it's ironic that testing young people's assumptions with respect to gender confusion is being labeled as conversion therapy. You know, you're converting a trans person, when really I think it's almost not a guise. I don't want to say guise, but you can see how there's a major concern amongst the gay community, or at least some parts of the gay community. Like, just have a look at Gays Against Groomers is a good source of some of these ideas. And I'm not saying you have to agree with everything they say or anything like that, but you can take a look for yourself. But there's a concern here with respect to who is being told that they are trans and then undergoing surgery or hormone therapy. And again, I mentioned before, those with autism, young girls, and also gay boys, or perhaps butch girls, lesbian girls. Now the same goes here. So we've, this is tragic, but I've met girls, biological females, who are uncomfortable, or who have become uncomfortable, who may not like pink, right? Who may go, okay, I don't like pink. I like sports. I'm more of a tomboy. And also they're uncomfortable with increasing sexual attention as they become more and more have more and more of a woman typical body, right? So they begin to have breasts, they begin to have more curves, whatnot. They become uncomfortable with this. And instead of helping a young girl progress into her woman body and supporting her through that journey and the discomfort that might go along with it, this girl might get told by these people who are desperate for a sense of meaning and purpose, oh, you are actually a boy. And also this person might choose, okay, I'm actually going to reject all of the expectations that go along, say, with motherhood. I mean, who can blame a girl, right? Motherhood is daunting, as is manhood for a boy. Who can blame a young girl or a young boy attempting to reject the social expectations that go along with manhood or womanhood? And so a rejection, an easy way to signal rejection of manhood or womanhood is by choosing a non-binary identity, is to say, I am a they, them. I am that which cannot be defined by you. By saying to you, my pronouns are they, them, I'm saying you cannot expect of me this nor this. Okay, with that said, let's jump back into the conversation with Theo.
3 times more likely to be on the non-binary, aromantic, and asexual spectrums.
Interesting. Okay. Why do you think that is? Why do you think that autistic
Because
people
we often feel like we are other, and well, I don't know the exact science, but for me and my boyfriend, who is also autistic, we feel like gender and our romantic attraction and our sexual attraction, it's more just My friend is gender void, which means instead of a gender, there is void. I am boy flux, which means my gender fluctuates. Right now I'm kind of feeling agender, but that can change. So, in my view, autistic people are more likely to be on the non-binary, aromantic, and asexual spectrums because they often feel other, and it's just they might feel separated from the gender spectrum and the romantic spectrum and the asexual spectrum.
Is that what your experience?
Yes.
You know, so when you were younger and people were starting to call you or refer to you as a girl more.
Yeah, when I was younger, I used to tie my hair behind my back, take off my glasses, wear a hoodie, and go to stores and pretend my name was Robert.
Right. Interesting. Okay.
And to me, what comes to mind there is, why, if Theo felt like that was more comfortable for Theo, why, I mean, could we not say to Theo as a young person, you're a biological female, you are still a she, her, that's all good, but you can wear the hoodie, you can wear your hair short, you can do that which you wish, you're not determined, or your story, your life narrative is not determined by your biology or by your underlying sex in this case.
Okay, and that was because you felt uncomfortable with the...
I am also disabled, and disabled people, 1 in 3 disabled people are queer.
Sorry, I just
1 in
missed
3 disabled people are part of the LGBTQ community, but I feel queer.
Right.
The reason for this is we often feel, again, other, and we often feel that our experiences
don't quite fit into the categories?
Yeah.
Right, okay. Theo, do you know why when people were referring to you as a girl or a she, do you know why it made you feel uncomfortable maybe?
It made me feel...
So I'm trying to go deeper on that idea of like, okay, why is the she, her? What is it that you associate with the she, her that makes you want to signal to other people, I don't want that for myself?
Like, my body wasn't my own, and personally that made me turn to some unhealthy habits, and when I discovered what being non-binary was, I realised that that was more of me. And now
Theo, sorry to interrupt, when you say that you felt like your body wasn't your own, was it that when people would call you she or a girl?
I felt like I was watching people call this just robot my old name and my old pronouns and my everything.
And that people were projecting?
And I was just watching from the sky. I felt like it was like an out-of-body experience every time someone calls me she or my dead name. It's just...
Now, I don't know whether this is accurate here, but I think perhaps one way of interpreting what Theo has just said here is that whenever she would get called she, her, or Theo is getting called she, her, that it would feel like, she mentioned the term robot. And to me, it seemed like she was saying she was being stripped of her autonomy. People were projecting onto her, this is who you're supposed to be, or this is what we expect from you. And that's what we associate with she, her. Now, I want to quickly mention here as well, with respect to autism, that a characteristic of autism, or a trait or a characteristic that often goes along with those who are diagnosed with autism, is a category rigidity. Which, another way of saying that is having very rigid conceptions or categories with respect to what is a man and what is a woman. And if I don't fit within those things, then it must be something else, or I must be between, I must be that one or this one. Instead of going, it's actually okay. If you don't fit into the sex-based stereotype, say you're a biological female like Theo, and you don't fit into the socially accepted or sociocultural sex-based stereotype of what biological females are typically like, that's okay. You don't have to conform to that necessarily. And you can still be a she, her, you can still be a biological female, and yet we can find common ground on that value for liberty and autonomy. Okay? And that's, again, where it's like, if you go deep enough and you have the linguistic tools to make sense of some of these ideas, you really can find common ground with people that you may have initially thought that was not possible. So let's jump back across to the conversation.
Really odd. And that's kind of how I've known that I am queer, that I am not a girl or a boy.
Right.
Because gender is so much more than that. There is so much more than just a binary.
And there, if someone were...
And just to find common ground with Theo here, I think what if I'm to translate that, there's not just you have to do what what biological males or biological females do. There's all of this variation in between where you can do and act in ways that are not in complete alignment with the two sex-based stereotypes of masculine or male typical and feminine and female typical. You do you. That's where we can find common ground. Apologies.
To, like, let's say that they said, whether you're a biological male, biological female, whatever, you should be allowed to do what you want, and pursue what you want to pursue. If they were to then say, well, when I refer to you as a girl or as a she, it's really not saying that you have to be a certain way. You can be whatever you want.
I know, but I don't feel like a she describes me.
Right. And so why is there another word that you feel describes you better?
I use several pronouns.
I wish I had gone down that pathway of actually just asking why again. So why is it that you don't feel comfortable with she, her? What is it that you associate with that leads to the discomfort?
I use the pronouns Z, star, and he. People can call me Z, Sam, star, stars, he, or he, him. I'm fine with any of this. My boyfriend.
And what makes you feel comfortable with those ones instead of the she?
A lot of autistic people use pronouns as well because things like they, them, they feel like you're conforming to the binary of just the 3 pronouns.
Right.
And that it just doesn't feel like me, honestly.
Right. Do you feel like you're kind of pigeonholed a little bit, like into, or you have a label that doesn't feel right for you, something like that?
Not anymore. I found several labels that help me. My advice
Like
to
not
anyone
like
who's
non-binary and trans. Did you say transmasculine?
transmasculine.
What for? Because I don't really understand what that means.
Transmasculine is anyone who is born in a feminine body, a female body, and transitions to be masculine. It can be a trans man person, it can be someone who transitions, it can be a non-binary person. I would say every trans man is transmasculine, and every trans woman, every trans femme, they're all trans feminine.
Okay. All
This
right.
is where I got a bit
Cool.
confused.
I think that kind of clarifies a lot in terms of understanding it
and just some
through
fun
your eyes.
words.
Yeah.
Transitioning decreases the rate of suicide in trans youth by 70%. Would you rather them be happy in a body, or would you rather a happy, feeling like themselves teen, or a dead teen? Goodbye.
Thanks for your time, Theo.
All right, a couple of things just to really wrap up here. First of all, with respect to those last comments from Theo, do your own research, have a look into that. I don't think it's as simple as that. But overall, I do just want to say like a massive thank you to Theo for engaging in the conversation and really unpacking. Again, the goal here should be to understand the other person's or the other side's perspective, so to speak. If we're speaking in terms of sides, there's generally this group of people who think that gender is a social construct and it's kind of arbitrary. And then there are people who believe that there are 2 genders and that they're related to sex. Now, I want to quickly do a recap here of everything that we've kind of covered in this conversation. So, whenever you're speaking to people about gender, you need to go deeper on finding clarity with respect to the linguistic blocks that you're going to use to actually interface with one another. If you're using a set of words and definitions and I'm using a set of words and definitions that mean different things, it's like we're screwed from the very beginning. So first thing, you need to be able to find common ground on sex as being biological. Okay? And going, okay, can we agree that there is biological male, there is biological female, and there, if in case it needs mentioning, there's also a small portion in sex. Okay. Can we find common ground on that? Can we also find that common ground that there are certain biological differences that lead to socio-cultural differences as well? Socio-cultural, maybe not differences is the right word, but like there's a reason why males are expected to be the provider, protector, generally speaking, cross-culturally and between, across eras as well. And that's not just an arbitrary social construct. It's moored in, it's a nice word, in our biology. Okay, so it's worth establishing, can we find common ground that there are 2 sexes? Okay, can we find common ground then that there are that there are sex-based stereotypes? Okay, and I like going, okay, we've got masculine, which is what all of the traits and qualities that we typically expect from biological males, and then we have feminine. So all of the traits and characteristics that we typically expect from biological females. Again, I'm just saying biological female. Usually in everyday conversation, I just say male or female. Here I'm saying biological male or biological female just for clarity's sake. So can we find common ground? We have sex, we have sex-based stereotypes, masculine and feminine. Now, when it comes to gender, let's just avoid the term gender and see if we can be clearer. Okay, so whenever someone says gender identity, what do you mean? Do you mean how someone feels on the inside? And then I would be asking, okay, well, how do you know how you feel on the inside? If we have a biological male who says, I feel like a woman or I am a woman, I would say, okay, well, how is that not based on your sex-based stereotypes of what a woman is or what a male or man is or what is masculine and what is feminine? Then when it comes to gender expression, that might be another useful linguistic tool in your toolkit for making sense of these conversations. Some other key ideas that we touched on. Why amongst the trans ID identifying community, why are we finding that there's an overrepresentation? There's not equal outcome. Okay, so if you're for equity, then you should be against this, right? It should be a red flag to us that it's disproportionately girls. It's also, there seems to be an element of social contagion. So why is it, in the same way with things like bulimia and anorexia, why are we finding that this is being spread socially, right? And it pops up in social pockets as opposed to being evenly distributed throughout the population. So girls, also, why is it overrepresented? Why do we find that particular demographics, in particular fairly wealthy, I'm just going to write wealthier and also white. Why is it that this group of people tends to be overrepresented amongst trans-identifying people? Could it be something to do with all the privilege messaging that they're being told, and that it's actually not cool to just be normal, and that you find some kind of identity, or that there is some kind of, key word here, incentive structure? It's getting messy. Incentive. There is a perverse incentive structure whereby we are socially incentivizing young people, in particular, perhaps young girls who may be white or somewhat wealthy or of a wealthier socioeconomic class. We're incentivizing these people to identify as trans, and unfortunately some of them are going down the pathway of having their breasts removed and going on testosterone, and then later finding out that they were swept up into social contagion, and it's tragic. Anyway, so we touched on why is it that it's girls, why is it that it's, in this case, I'm mentioning the wealthy and white, why is it also disproportionately amongst those with autism? That's also a red flag. I'm going to move over here. And then, so we've got autism, young girls, and also those who are rather kind of, who get told that they're privileged, yeah? Now, we also touched on this relationship, and this will be a theme that I think you'll see pop up over and over again now that you're familiar with it, of the victim-savior complex. The rise in victimhood is only capable, or it's only made possible by the abundance of those who are desperate to become saviors. It's why people will nullify facts. People will ignore facts and inconvenient facts that strip them of their sense of meaning, purpose, and direction. And so that's why we see some of these affirmations of victimhood claims without any discernment. And so again, you can also see how that incentivizes claims of victimhood and identification as the oppressed or the victim, as opposed to identities that may not be as à la vogue, we might say. All right, ladies and gentlemen, I hope that you found this episode helpful. Another big thank you to Theo. I plan on doing some more episodes like this in the future. So if this is something that you're interested in, then feel free to drop a comment and let me know what you liked about it. But I hope you're all doing well, and I'll see you in the next episode.